Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the glass walls of Reynolds and Associates as James Reynolds gathered his papers from the conference room. The Major Johnson account was finally secured. 3 months of 60-hour weeks had paid off. He checked his Rolex, 2:15 p.m. For once, he could leave early and surprise Lisa at home. Heading out already, boss? Michael, his VP of operations, raised an eyebrow as James packed his briefcase. First time for everything. James allowed himself a small smile. The Johnson deal's locked in. Everything else can wait until tomorrow. Well deserved. Michael hesitated. Oh, your brother Daniel called earlier. Said he couldn't reach your cell. James's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Daniel always called the office when he wanted something, usually money. Did he say what he wanted? Just that he'd catch up with you at Sunday dinner. Right. James made a mental note to have his assistant screen Daniel's calls more carefully. Last time, his younger brother had convinced her to put him through to an important client meeting, claiming it was an emergency. The emergency turned out to be Daniel needing bail money after a bar fight. The elevator descended smoothly to the parking garage, and James used the time to loosen his tie. His fingers brushed against the small velvet box in his jacket pocket, a pair of diamond earrings he'd picked up last week. Lisa had pointed them out months ago during a shopping trip, and he'd finally found the perfect pair. 13 years of marriage had taught him the value of surprising her with thoughtful gifts. As he slid into his black Mercedes, memories of their early days flooded back. Lisa, fresh out of nursing school, working double shifts while he built his firm from the ground up. They'd struggled, but they'd struggled together. Now, with his company thriving and her successful career as a nurse practitioner, they had everything they'd dreamed of. The drive home took 20 minutes. Autumn leaves dancing across the windshield as he navigated the streets of their upscale suburb. Lisa's red BMW sat in the driveway of their colonial-style house. She must be home on her day off. James pulled in beside her car at 2:47 p.m., killing the engine with a satisfied smile. The house stood quiet as he inserted his key into the front door, warm afternoon light streaming through the beveled glass panels. Lisa, he called out softly, not wanting to startle her if she was napping. She often took afternoon naps on her days off, catching up on sleep after her long hospital shifts. No response. The house felt different somehow, the air heavier, charged with something he couldn't name. James loosened his tie further as he climbed the stairs, his footsteps muffled by the plush carpet they'd picked out together last spring. That a sound caught his attention, faint at first, then clearer with each step. A rhythmic creaking coming from their bedroom. His brow furrowed as another sound joined the first, a moan, distinctly Lisa's voice, but different from how she sounded with him. More desperate, more passionate. The master bedroom door was closed but not completely shut, a sliver of light spilling through the gap. As he reached for the handle, his mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Maybe she was exercising. Maybe she was watching something on her tablet. Maybe another moan, followed by a deeper grunt, masculine, familiar. That James's hand froze on the doorknob. Time seemed to stretch and warp around him, the moment extending into infinity as his brain processed what he was hearing. What he knew, deep in his gut, he was about to see. He pushed the door open. The scene before him burned into his retinas like a photographer's flash, every detail crystal clear and obscene in its clarity. Lisa, her honey blonde hair wild and damp with sweat, straddling a man on their king-size bed. The same bed where they'd made love countless times. The same bed where they'd planned their future, discussed having children, shared their deepest fears and dreams. But it wasn't the sight of his wife's naked body that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the way her head was thrown back in pleasure, or how her manicured nails dug into the chest beneath her. It was the face of the man she was with, his younger brother Daniel, his features twisted in ecstasy. The velvet box in James's pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Lisa noticed him first. Her eyes widened in horror as she scrambled off Daniel, clutching their Egyptian cotton sheets, a wedding anniversary gift, to her chest. James! Oh God, this isn't. Daniel didn't move to cover himself. Instead, he propped himself up on his elbows, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. That smirk said everything words couldn't. I won. I took what was yours. That IT was the same smirk he'd worn throughout their childhood, every time he'd taken something that belonged to James. The baseball card collection in 3rd grade. The car he'd borrowed and crashed in high school. The inheritance money he convinced their parents to invest in his failed businesses instead of helping James with his first down payment. But this was different. This wasn't just another possession Daniel had coveted and stolen. This was James's wife, his life partner, his future. That James's hand moved to his pocket, not for the earrings, but for his phone. With mechanical precision, he pulled it out and tapped the screen a few times, his fingers steady despite the earthquake happening in his chest. James, please, Lisa's voice cracked. It was a mistake. We never meant. I just sent your wife a video of you two. James's voice came out steady, colder than he'd ever heard it. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but they were the right ones. The necessary ones. The smirk vanished from Daniel's face like it had been slapped off. He lunged for his pants, fumbling for his phone with trembling hands. No, no, no. The notification sound from Daniel's phone confirmed the message had been delivered to Emily. Lisa stumbled forward, still wrapped in the sheet, mascara running down her cheeks. The sight of her tears might have moved James once. Now they only fueled his rage. James, baby, please. We can work this out. I love you. Don't. The single word cut through the air like a blade. Don't say that word. Not here. Not now. Daniel finally found his voice, pulling on his jeans with shaking hands. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by naked fear. Brother, let me explain. We're not brothers. James met Daniel's eyes, recognizing the same brown shade as his own, their father's eyes. Brothers don't do this. The room fell silent except for Lisa's quiet sobs and Daniel's labored breathing as he searched for his shirt. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight. James noticed Lisa's silk robe, his Christmas gift to her, crumpled on the floor beside Daniel's expensive leather shoes. The shoes James had helped him pick out for Emily's birthday dinner last month. How long? James asked, his tone conversational, as if inquiring about the weather. Inside, memories were already realigning themselves. All those family dinners, those business trips where Daniel had insisted on driving Lisa to the airport because it was on his way. The late-night phone calls Lisa claimed were from the hospital, neither answered. How long? Lisa flinched at his tone. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of them laughing behind his back. Half a year of family dinners where they'd played happy families while sneaking glances at each other across the table. He thought of last month's barbecue, how Daniel had volunteered to help Lisa in the kitchen. How long had they been alone together? What had they done while Emily helped James with the grill? Get out. James stepped aside from the doorway. Both of you. Daniel grabbed his shirt from the floor, nearly tripping as he rushed past James. The stench of his cologne, the same brand James wore, made bile rise in James's throat. Another thing Daniel had copied, had stolen. James, please. Lisa reached for him, her fingers trembling. Let me explain. We can fix this. He caught her wrist before she could touch him, his grip firm but not cruel. The contact made his skin crawl. There's nothing to fix. Pack a bag and get out. But this is my house too. The house that my salary paid for. James released her wrist like it burned him. The house that's in my name alone because you insisted we keep our finances separate? That house. Lisa's face crumpled. They both knew she had no legal claim to the property. She'd been adamant about maintaining financial independence, claiming it was a modern approach to marriage. Now James wondered if she'd planned for this possibility all along. If this had been her exit strategy from the beginning. You have 1 hour, James continued, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Take what you need for a few days. We'll arrange for you to get the rest later. Where am I supposed to go? I'm sure my brother has room at his place. The bitterness in his voice could have stripped paint. Though you might want to wait a few hours. Emily will probably be done throwing his things out by then. Lisa sank onto the bed, their bed, and buried her face in her hands. James turned away, unable to bear the sight of her crying. How many times had he held her while she cried, comforted her after a hard day at work, listened to her fears and dreams, The memories felt poisoned now, tainted by the knowledge that while he'd been building their life together, she'd been destroying it piece by piece as he walked downstairs, each step measured and controlled. In the kitchen, he poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, the expensive bottle Daniel had given him for Christmas. Probably bought it with my money, he thought, remembering the loans his brother had never repaid. The times Daniel had come to him, hat in hand, spinning stories about business opportunities and temporary setbacks. The liquor burned going down, but the pain was welcome. It gave him something to focus on besides the images playing on repeat in his mind. Images he knew would haunt him for years to come. His phone buzzed. Emily's name flashed on the screen. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me it's not true." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Tell me that video isn't real." "I'm sorry, Emily." The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had done. A choked sob. "I just watched my husband, with your wife, in your bed." "I know." What else could he say? How could he possibly comfort her when his own world was imploding? "How long have you known?" "I just found out. Came home early to surprise Lisa." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Surprise? I think I'm going to be sick." The sound of retching came through the line, followed by more crying. "What are we going to do?" "What we have to do." James took another sip of bourbon, letting the burn ground him in reality. "You'll call a lawyer. I'll call mine. We'll end this." All those times they were together at family functions. All those business trips they took. Emily's voice broke. "God, James, how could they do this to us?" "Emily." James cut her off gently. "Don't torture yourself with the past. Focus on what needs to be done now." "You're right." She took a shaky breath. Unpacking his things. I can't look at him right now. I can't even imagine." "I understand." He heard footsteps on the stairs, Lisa probably coming down with her bag. "I have to go. Call me if you need anything." "James." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. You deserve better." "We both did." "Yes, we did." He ended the call, just as Lisa appeared in the kitchen doorway, a small suitcase in hand. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, her face freshly washed but still showing traces of tears. The diamond necklace he'd given her for their 10th anniversary still hung around her neck, another gift she didn't deserve. "James," he held up a hand. "Don't. Just go. Can we at least talk about this? About the future?" The future. He met her eyes, searching for any trace of the woman he'd married. The woman he thought he knew. "The future died the moment I opened that door." She took a step toward him. "You don't mean that." 13 years of marriage. 13 years of what? The bourbon glass hit the counter with more force than necessary. 13 years of me working myself to the bone to give you everything you wanted? 13 years of you fucking my brother behind my back? Tell me, Lisa, which part of those 13 years should I be sentimental about right now? It wasn't like that. Lisa's voice rose, tinged with desperation. "Daniel and I, it just happened. We never meant to hurt you." James laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Never meant to hurt me? You slept with my brother in my bed. The bed I bought. In the house I paid for. While wearing the jewelry I gave you." His eyes fixed on the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, last year's anniversary gift. "Take it off." "What?" "The bracelet. Take it off." Her hand went to her wrist protectively. "James, please. Take it off." With trembling fingers, she unclasped the bracelet and set it on the counter. James picked it up and dropped it into his bourbon glass, watching the diamonds disappear beneath the amber liquid. "Get out." This time, she didn't argue. The front door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty house. James pulled out his phone again and made 2 calls, first to his lawyer, then to the locksmith. By morning, the locks would be changed and divorce papers would be in process. No chance for Lisa to return when he wasn't home. No opportunity for her to take what didn't belong to her. The velvet box with the earrings still sat heavy in his pocket. He took it out and opened it, studying the way the diamonds caught the afternoon light. Perfect princess cuts, just like Lisa had wanted. Just like she'd pointed out in the jewelry store window, pressing close to him, her perfume surrounding him. Had she already been sleeping with Daniel then? He snapped the box shut and dropped it into the trash upstairs. He could smell them on the sheets. Lisa's perfume mixed with Daniel's cologne. The same cologne James had worn for years, The one Daniel had started wearing after commenting on how much women seemed to like it on James. Another piece of himself that Daniel had tried to steal, had tried to become. James stripped the bed methodically, bundling the expensive sheets into a garbage bag. The mattress would have to go too. He'd sleep in the guest room tonight. Today as he worked, his mind cleared. The initial shock faded, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. Daniel and Lisa hadn't just betrayed him. They'd betrayed Emily too. They destroyed 2 marriages, 2 families. With their selfishness, his phone buzzed again. A text from Daniel. "Please, brother. Let me explain. We need to talk." James typed back a single word. "Don't." Another buzz. "You're still my brother. Family is forever." James blocked the number without responding. Daniel wasn't family anymore. Family didn't do this to each other. Family didn't destroy each other's lives and then beg for forgiveness. The sun was setting by the time he finished cleaning the bedroom, casting long shadows through the windows. In the fading light, James sat in his home office. Opening his laptop with steady hands that he had work to do first, he pulled up their cell phone records. His name was on Lisa's account, something she'd never bothered to change. The evidence was there, clear as day. 6 months of calls and texts to Daniel's number, sometimes late at night, sometimes during her shifts at the hospital. He downloaded the records methodically, creating a digital trail of their betrayal. Next came the credit card statements. Lisa had always insisted on having her own card for independence, she'd said. Now he saw the truth in the transactions. Charges at hotels he'd never heard of, restaurants in towns where Lisa claimed to be attending medical conferences. Receipts for lingerie he'd never seen her, where a pattern emerged in his search. A second phone appeared. A prepaid number Lisa had been using, probably to communicate with Daniel more discreetly. James made note of it all, his lawyer's training kicking in as he documented each piece of evidence. His phone buzzed again. "Emily, I found receipts," she said without preamble, her voice hoarse from crying. "Hotel rooms, restaurants. God, James, they weren't even trying to hide it. Keep everything," he advised, his business voice taking over. "Every receipt, every statement. We'll need it all." "Daniel's outside," she whispered. "He keeps calling, texting, begging to explain." "Don't let him in. Don't let him explain anything. Call the police if you have to." "I won't." Her voice strengthened. "I'm done listening to his lies." After hanging up, James opened his email and began composing a message to his lawyer. They'd been careful, Lisa and Daniel, but not careful enough. They'd left a trail, and James would follow it. Document it. Use it. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken him, but James Reynolds didn't break. He got even. The bourbon sat untouched on his desk as he worked through the night, methodically building his case. Every receipt, every message, every piece of evidence carefully cataloged and saved. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about justice, about consequences, about revenge. When the sun rose the next morning, James was ready. He'd taken the first steps of a plan that would destroy them both, not with violence or threats, but with the cold, methodical precision that had made him successful in business. That they'd played their game. Now it was his turn. 1 week after discovering his wife's betrayal, James sat in his office reviewing the mounting evidence against Lisa and Daniel. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk, where stacks of paper documented their deception in cold, hard detail. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Reynolds?" His assistant's voice carried a note of concern. "Your brother is in the lobby again. He's demanding to see you." James's jaw tightened. "Call security. He says he won't leave until you talk to him." "Should I tell security to remove him?" "And Jessica?" He paused. "Have them take his picture. He's not to be allowed in the building again." "Yes, sir." Through his office window, James watched as 2 security guards escorted Daniel out. His brother's expensive suit, probably bought with borrowed money, was wrinkled, his usual swagger replaced by desperation. Good. His phone lit up with a text from Emily. "Can we meet for coffee? I have something you need to see." James responded immediately. Golden cup. 30 minutes. The cafe was quiet when he arrived, most of the morning rush having ended. Emily sat in a corner booth, her normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. Dark circles under her eyes matched his own. "Thanks for coming," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. I've been going through Daniel's things, trying to... She swallowed hard. Trying to understand. Don't torture yourself, James warned, but Emily was already pulling out a stack of papers from her bag. Look at these. She spread several bank statements across the table. He's been moving money around. Large transfers to offshore accounts. All within the last 6 months. James studied the documents, his lawyer's mind cataloging the implications. The timing matches. That's not all. Emily's voice hardened. I found this in his email. She handed him a printed exchange between Daniel and a realtor in the Cayman Islands. He was planning to leave. Had a house all picked out. For himself? For them. Emily's hands shook as she lifted her coffee cup. There are messages to Lisa about it. They were planning to run away together once they'd gathered enough money. James's fingers tightened on the paper until his knuckles went white. Where did the money come from? Some from our savings. Some from... Emily met his eyes. James, he's been embezzling from your company. The revelation should have shocked him, but somehow it didn't. Of course Daniel had stolen from him. He'd been doing it their entire lives, just never on this scale. How did you get access to his accounts? A ghost of a smile crossed Emily's face. He always used the same password for everything. Your birthday, of all things. Ironic, isn't it? James pulled out his phone and dialed his company's CFO. Mark, I need a full audit of all accounts Daniel had access to. Every transaction, every approval, going back 3 years. He paused, listening. Yes, it's what you think. And Mark, keep it quiet for now. After ending the call, he looked back at Emily. Thank you for this. It helps. I'm not doing it for you. Emily's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I'm doing it because he needs to pay. They both do. James nodded, understanding perfectly. Have you heard from Lisa? She tried to call yesterday. Wanted to explain, to apologize. Emily's laugh was bitter. As if an apology could fix this. I blocked her number. Smart. James gathered the documents, adding them to his growing collection of evidence. They're getting desperate. Daniel showed up at my office today. What did he want? To talk. To explain. To beg. James's voice remained cold. The usual script of a man who got caught and thinks words can undo actions. The cafe door chimed, and both of them tensed as Lisa walked in. She froze when she saw them, her designer purse clutched like a shield. For a moment, no one moved. I'll handle this, James said quietly to Emily. He stood, positioning himself between the two women. Lisa took a tentative step forward. James, please. This is a restraining order. James pulled an envelope from his jacket and held it out. You're to stay 500 feet away from me, my home, and my place of business. You can't be serious. Lisa's voice cracked. James, we need to talk about this. About us? There is no us. He placed the envelope on a nearby table. My lawyer will contact yours. Don't try to see me again. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Behind him, James heard Emily's sharp intake of breath that Lisa's hand went to her stomach, her eyes pleading. I just found out. That's why I've been trying to reach you. We're going to have a baby. James studied her face. The face he'd woken up to for 13 years. The face that had lied to him countless times. His expression didn't change as he spoke. No, we're not. What do you mean? I have the test results. I had a vasectomy. James's voice was perfectly steady. 2 years ago, the color drained from Lisa's face. That's not possible. I never told you because you were always so adamant about not wanting children. Remember? You said your career came first. His smile was razor sharp. Congratulations. You and Daniel are going to be parents. Lisa swayed on her feet, reaching for a chair to steady herself. James, the restraining order takes effect immediately. He turned his back on her, returning to his seat across from Emily. Behind him, he heard Lisa's heels clicking rapidly across the floor, followed by the sound of muffled sobs. Emily waited until the door closed before speaking. You never told me about the vasectomy. I never told anyone. James took a sip of his now cold coffee. Lisa always said she didn't want children. I decided to make sure I wouldn't accidentally change her plans. And now it's proof. He pulled out his phone, sending a quick text to his lawyer. Proof that my wife wasn't just sleeping with my brother. She was trying to trap me with his child. Emily's eyes widened as she understood. This changes everything. Yes, James agreed, already formulating the next phase of his plan. It does. The news of Lisa's pregnancy spread through their social circle like wildfire. James sat in his home office that evening, listening to another voicemail from his mother. James, sweetheart, please call me back. Lisa told me about the baby. I know things are difficult right now, but this is your child. You can't just... He deleted the message before it finished. His phone immediately lit up with a text from Daniel. We need to talk about the baby. Please. I'm begging you. James forwarded the message to his lawyer, adding it to the growing file of harassment evidence. Then he dialed a number he'd been saving for the right moment. Dr. Matthews? James Reynolds. I need copies of my medical records from 2 years ago. Specifically, the vasectomy procedure and follow-up tests. The doctor's response was immediate. Of course, Mr. Reynolds. Though I must say, I was surprised to receive a call from your wife last week asking about the same records. James's grip tightened on the phone. What did you tell her? Nothing, of course. Patient confidentiality. She seemed quite insistent that there must be some mistake. There's no mistake. James's voice was ice. Send the records to my lawyer. You'll receive the contact information shortly. His doorbell rang just as he ended the call. Through the security camera, he saw Daniel on his front steps, shoulders slumped, still wearing the same wrinkled suit from this morning. James pressed the intercom. You have 30 seconds to leave before I call the police. Brother, please. Daniel's voice cracked. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But this is my child we're talking about. 20 seconds. I love her, James. Daniel pressed his hands against the door. I know that's the last thing you want to hear, but it's true. Lisa and I, what we have is real. James laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. What you have is adultery and fraud. 15 seconds. Fraud? What are you talking about? Ask Lisa about the offshore accounts. James watched Daniel's face pale through the camera. Ask her about the house in the Caymans. 10 seconds. How did you... Daniel ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Look, I can explain everything. 5 seconds. James, please. You're going to be an uncle. Time's up. James pressed another button on his phone. In the distance, police sirens wailed. I warned you about coming here. Daniel's face contorted with anger. You can't do this. That's my child. Yes, it is. James's voice remained steady. Your child. Your responsibility. Your problem. He watched as 2 police cars pulled up to the curb. Oh, and Daniel? The officers have a copy of the restraining order. Have fun explaining that to your lawyer. He turned off the intercom as the police approached Daniel, their lights painting his brother's face in alternating red and blue. Through the window, he watched them lead Daniel away. His protests fading into the night, his phone buzzed again. Emily. I just got a hysterical call from Lisa, she said without preamble. She's threatening to go to the media about how you're abandoning your pregnant wife. James moved to his desk, opening his laptop. Let her try. You don't seem worried. I'm not. He pulled up a folder of documents. I just sent you something. Take a look. A moment of silence as Emily read. Then, oh my God, the money. They were planning this for months? 6 months, to be exact. The same time their affairs started. James clicked through bank statements and transfer records. Daniel was siphoning money from my company, moving it through shell corporations, then into offshore accounts. Lisa was helping him hide it. But why? They both had good jobs, comfortable lives, greed. James's voice hardened. Daniel always wanted what I had. My success, my money, my wife. Lisa wanted more than I could give her. They thought they could take it all. What are you going to do? Watch. He opened another file emails between Lisa and Daniel, discussing their escape plans. Tomorrow morning, the board receives evidence of Daniel's embezzlement. By afternoon, the police will have enough to press charges. By evening, he paused, allowing himself a small smile. Well, let's just say Lisa's hospital administration might be interested in some irregularities I found in her prescription records. James, Emily's voice held a note of concern. Are you sure about this? Going after their careers, their freedom. It seems what? James cut her off. Too harsh? Too cruel? Tell me, Emily, What's the appropriate response when your wife and brother steal millions from you, plan to frame you for it, then try to trap you with their illegitimate child? Silence filled the line. They made their choices, James continued, his tone softening slightly. Now they face the consequences. You're right. Emily took a deep breath. I never thought it would come to this. Daniel was always selfish, but people show you who they really are when they think they can get away with it. James closed his laptop. Speaking of which, how much did you tell your family? Everything. Emily's voice cracked. My mother hasn't stopped crying. Dad wants to kill him. My brother already pulled Daniel's invitation to his wedding. Good. They should know the truth. Lisa's sister called me today, Emily added. Wanted to know if I'd heard from them. Apparently, Lisa's been asking family for money, claiming you froze all her accounts. I didn't have to. James allowed himself a small, cold smile. The bank did that automatically when they noticed the suspicious transfers. Funny how actions have consequences. A notification popped up on his phone and email from his lawyer. I have to go. Court filing in the morning. James. Emily's voice stopped him before he could hang up. Thank you for not letting them get away with this. They thought they were smarter than us. James's voice was steel. Time to show them how wrong they were. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of James's office as Mark, his CFO, spread dozens of financial documents across the conference table. Each page told a part of Daniel's betrayal in stark black and white. It's worse than we thought, Mark said, highlighting another suspicious transfer. He didn't just embezzle directly. He created fake vendors, ghost employees, inflated expense reports. The total amount. He slid a summary sheet across the table. James studied the number at the bottom. 4.6 million. That we've found so far. Mark ran a hand through his graying hair. Your brother was thorough. He built this scheme layer by layer, probably planning it for months before execution. A year. Actually, James pulled out his own file. Look at these emails between him and Lisa. They started planning this before the affair even began. Mark read through the exchanges, his face darkening. She helped him set it up? But she doesn't even work here. No, but she had access to something just as valuable. Medical credentials. James tapped another document. She created fake medical bills, insurance claims, wellness program invoices. The perfect cover for moving money. Jesus. Mark shook his head. What do you want me to tell the board? Everything. James stood, straightening his tie. The meeting's in an hour. Have security ready. Daniel might try to crash it when he realizes what's happening. His phone buzzed a text from Lisa. Please don't do this. Think about the baby. Think about our family. He typed back. I am thinking about family. That's why you're both going to jail. Another buzz. You're making a mistake. The baby needs its father. The baby has its father. He's just not me. James muted the conversation and turned to Mark. One more thing. After the board meeting, send these documents to every major hospital in the state. He handed over a thick folder. Make sure their compliance departments understand exactly how their star nurse practitioner helped defraud a major corporation. That'll end her career. Yes. James's voice was winter. It will. The board meeting went exactly as planned. 12 men and women sat in stunned silence as James and Mark laid out the evidence of Daniel's systematic theft. Security cameras showed Daniel being turned away at the lobby, screaming about his rights as a shareholder. The police have been notified, James concluded, his voice steady. Criminal charges will be filed this afternoon. I expect full cooperation from everyone in this room. Theodore Wilson, the eldest board member, cleared his throat. James, son, are you sure you want to do this? He's your brother. Was my brother. James met the older man's eyes. The man who stole from this company, who betrayed my trust, who planned to frame me for his crimes. That man is a stranger. Frame you? Another board member leaned forward. What do you mean? James nodded to Mark, who distributed another set of documents. These emails show their original plan. Once they had enough money moved offshore, they were going to alter the transfer records to make it look like I authorized everything. By the time anyone discovered the truth, they'd be living in the Caymans with my money, and I'd be facing federal charges. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Theodore's face had turned purple with rage. Those ungrateful, he took a deep breath. You have our full support, James. Whatever you need. Thank you. James gathered his papers. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the district attorney. In the elevator, his phone rang. Emily. It's done, she said without preamble. I just finished testifying to the medical board about Lisa's prescription fraud. How did she take it? She wasn't there, but her lawyer looked ready to throw up when I showed them the evidence. Emily's voice hardened. Turns out she wasn't just helping Daniel steal money. She was writing prescriptions for non-existent patients, billing insurance companies for treatments that never happened, all to fund their escape plan. Yes, the board's suspending her license pending a full investigation. She'll never work in medicine again. James stepped out of the elevator into the parking garage. How are you holding up? Better than expected. Emily's voice strengthened. It helps, knowing they're not getting away with it. Knowing they can't just run off to paradise with their stolen money and their loved child while we're left with nothing. Speaking of the child, James unlocked his car. Have you told your parents that they're about to be grandparents to a child conceived in adultery? No, I'm leaving that joy to Daniel. She paused. Have you told yours? They know the truth now. All of it. James started the engine. My mother's devastated. Dad hasn't said a word since I showed him the evidence. Do you think we're being too harsh? James thought about the smirk on Daniel's face that day in the bedroom. About the years of manipulation and lies. About the carefully planned betrayal that would have destroyed his life if he hadn't caught them. No, he said finally. We're being exactly as harsh as they deserve. His phone beeped with another message, this one from his lawyer. The district attorney had approved the arrest warrants. By sunset, Daniel and Lisa would be in handcuffs, their dreams of escape shattered, their reputations destroyed just as they'd planned to destroy him. I have to go, he told Emily. The DA's waiting. James. Her voice stopped him before he could hang up. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come home early that day? He gripped the steering wheel tighter, remembering the velvet box with the diamond earrings. The surprise that had turned into a very different kind of revelation. No, he said firmly. I don't wonder, because then they would have won. And I don't let people win when they try to destroy me. The call ended, and James pulled out of the parking garage into the bright afternoon sun. In a few hours, Daniel and Lisa's worlds would implode. Their careers would be over. Their freedom would be gone. Their dreams of escape would turn to ash in their mouths that they'd played their game. They'd made their choices. Now they would pay the price. 3 months had passed since James exposed Daniel's embezzlement and Lisa's medical fraud. The autumn leaves had given way to winter frost, and the legal system ground forward with mechanical precision. Now, on a crisp December morning, James sat in his lawyer's office, reviewing the final pieces of his plan. The DNA test results came back. Richard Bennett, his attorney, slid a sealed envelope across the mahogany desk. Do you want to open it? James picked up the envelope, but didn't break the seal. No need. We both know what it says. True. Richard leaned back in his chair. Lisa's lawyer called again. She's willing to sign whatever divorce agreement you want if you'll drop the criminal charges. Not happening. James's voice was arctic. How's Daniel enjoying county jail? Not well, according to his public defender. Richard shuffled through some papers. He's offering to testify against Lisa in exchange for a lighter sentence. Claims she masterminded the whole fraud scheme. James allowed himself a small smile. They're turning on each other. Good. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. Please reconsider the family dinner announcement. We can handle this privately. Your parents still don't approve? Richard asked, noting James's expression. They think I'm being cruel. James typed a quick response, no. Everyone needs to know the truth. They'd rather pretend none of this happened. Keep up appearances. And you? I want everyone to see exactly who Daniel and Lisa really are. James stood straightening his tie. Speaking of which, is everything ready for tonight? Richard nodded. All the documentation is prepared. Your entire extended family will be there. Everyone. James checked his watch. Mandatory family meeting to discuss the joyous news of Lisa's pregnancy. My mother insisted. They don't suspect anything. Lisa thinks it's her chance to reconcile. To convince everyone I'm the villain for abandoning my pregnant wife. James's smile was sharp enough to cut. She's in for a surprise. The door opened, and Emily walked in, elegant in a black pantsuit. 3 months had transformed her from betrayed wife to avenging angel. The reporters are confirmed for tomorrow morning. Once tonight's revelation hits the news, Daniel's plea deal is dead. How's the bankruptcy proceeding going? James asked. Daniel's assets are frozen. The house is in foreclosure. Emily's voice held no remorse. His lawyer quit when he couldn't pay the retainer. Now he's stuck with a public defender who barely looks at his case. And Lisa, living with her sister. Emily's lip curled. Working as a waitress since no hospital will touch her. She tried to apply at a clinic in the next state, but somehow they found out about her fraud charges. Somehow. Richard raised an eyebrow. I might have sent them her case file. Emily sat down, crossing her legs. Anonymous concern for patient safety. You know, James checked his phone again. Another text from Lisa. Your mother says you're making an announcement tonight. Please, James. Think about what you're doing. He typed back. I have thought about it. For 3 months, her response was immediate. The baby deserves better than this. Yes, it does. It deserves the truth. Mr. Reynolds? Richard's secretary poked her head in. Detective Morrison is here with those records you requested. James nodded. Send him in. Detective Morrison entered, carrying a thick file. The same detective who'd arrested Daniel 3 months ago now smiled grimly as he handed the documents to James. Everything you asked for, Morrison said. Prison phone calls, visitor logs, correspondence. They haven't been as careful as they should be. James flipped through the file. They've been in contact? Through Daniel's cellmate's girlfriend. She passed messages between them. Morrison tapped a transcript. They were still plotting to run. Lisa was trying to access the offshore accounts, planning to flee the country before the baby comes. Send copies to the DA, James instructed. This violates both their bail conditions. Already done. Morrison straightened his tie. Ms. Reynolds' bail has been revoked. Officers are picking her up within the hour. Emily leaned forward. Will they hold her? Until trial? Almost certainly. Flight risk just became a major concern. James closed the file. Perfect timing. You still going through with the dinner? Emily asked. Now more than ever. James stood, gathering his papers. By the time Lisa misses the announcement, she'll be in a holding cell. No chance for her to spin the story her way. Richard handed him the sealed DNA test results. You're ending 3 lives tonight, James. Lisa's, Daniel's, and their unborn child's. No. James's voice was steel. They ended their own lives the moment they chose to betray me. I'm just making sure everyone knows exactly who they really are. The winter sun was setting as James left the office, casting long shadows across the city. In his briefcase, the sealed envelope waited like a loaded gun. In a few hours, he would pull the trigger and nothing would ever be the same. The Reynolds family estate loomed against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with warmth that belied the tension within. James pulled his Mercedes into the circular driveway, noting the collection of familiar vehicles. The whole family had arrived exactly as he'd planned. His father, Robert Reynolds, met him at the door. Age and stress had carved new lines in the older man's face over the past 3 months. Son, you're sure about this? Hello to you too, Dad. James handed his coat to the waiting maid. And yes, I'm sure. Your mother's beside herself. Robert followed James into the study, closing the door behind them. She thinks you're being vindictive. James poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, his father's best. Is that what you think? I think. Robert paused, choosing his words carefully. I think Daniel made his bed. But this public humiliation, involving the whole family deserves to know the truth. James turned to face his father. Or would you prefer they believe I abandoned my pregnant wife? Of course not, but a knock interrupted them. James's mother, Eleanor, entered without waiting for a response. Her usual perfect composure showed cracks around the edges. James, please. She crossed the room, reaching for him. It's not too late to handle this privately. Think of the scandal. The scandal? James stepped back from her touch. You mean like the scandal of my brother stealing millions from my company? Or the scandal of my wife helping him do it? That's different. How? James's voice cut like a blade. How is it different, Mother? Because this is about a baby. Eleanor's carefully maintained facade cracked. Your child, not my child. James pulled the sealed envelope from his jacket. And after tonight, everyone will know exactly whose child it is. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest. You can't mean to. I can and I will. James finished his scotch. Now, is everyone here? Yes, but good. He moved toward the door. Then it's time. The main dining room buzzed with conversation as James entered. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the entire Reynolds clan gathered around the massive table. Emily sat near the end, her back straight, her face composed. She gave him an imperceptible nod. James took his place at the head of the table, where his father usually sat. The room gradually fell silent. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice carrying to every corner. I know there's been a lot of speculation about recent events. About Lisa's pregnancy. About my brother's legal troubles. His Aunt Patricia spoke up from halfway down the table. James, dear, we're just concerned. A baby changes everything. Yes, James agreed smoothly. It does, which is why I've gathered everyone here. To ensure there are no misunderstandings about this situation. Where is Lisa? His cousin Michael asked. Shouldn't she be here for this? James allowed himself a small smile. Lisa won't be joining us. She's currently in police custody for violating her bail conditions. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Eleanor swayed slightly, and Robert steadied her. What about Daniel? Someone asked. My brother remains in county jail, unable to make bail. James's voice remained steady. But he's very much a part of tonight's announcement. He reached into his jacket and withdrew the envelope. The room went completely still. 3 months ago, James continued, I discovered my wife and brother were having an affair. Not just an affair, a carefully planned conspiracy to steal millions from my company and flee the country. We know all this, his Uncle Thomas interrupted. But surely with the baby, yes, the baby. James held up the envelope. Tell me, Uncle Thomas, did you know I had a vasectomy 2 years ago? The silence in the room became absolute. Even the crackling fireplace seemed to hold its breath. That's impossible, Eleanor whispered. You never said. I never said because it wasn't anyone's business but mine. James ran his finger under the envelope seal. Lisa didn't know. She was so adamant about not wanting children. I decided to ensure there wouldn't be any accidents. Emily spoke up, her voice clear and cold. Open it, James. Let everyone see the truth. James broke the seal slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the room fixed on his hands as he withdrew the paper inside. This is a DNA test, he announced, comparing my DNA with that of Lisa's unborn child. Would anyone like to guess the results? No one spoke. No one moved. The probability of paternity is 0%. James's voice filled the silence. 0, which means this child, the child Lisa tried to pass off as mine, belongs to my brother. The room erupted in chaos. Eleanor collapsed into a chair. Robert's face turned purple, and various relatives began talking all at once. I have copies for everyone. James continued over the din, pulling out a stack of papers, along with complete documentation of their affair, their fraud, and their plans to frame me for their crimes. His Aunt Patricia found her voice first. Frame you? Oh, yes. James smiled without warmth. They planned everything. The affair, the theft, the pregnancy. They thought they could pin the embezzlement on me and escape to the Cayman Islands with my money. Live happily ever after with their loved child, while I rotted in federal prison. My boys, Eleanor whispered. My own boys. Daniel stopped being my brother the moment he betrayed me. James's voice could have frozen hell. And Lisa stopped being my wife the moment she chose him. He began distributing the papers, watching as his family's expressions shifted from shock to horror to disgust as they read the evidence of Daniel and Lisa's betrayal. There's more, he announced. Much more. But I believe this is enough for tonight. I just wanted everyone to understand exactly who they're dealing with, who they're defending, who they're asking me to forgive. Robert stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need air. Take your time, Dad. James's voice softened slightly. It's a lot to process. Finding out your son is a thief and your daughter-in-law is a fraud. That your grandchild was conceived in betrayal. The room had grown eerily quiet. The only sound the rustling of papers as family members continued reading the damning evidence. Emily rose gracefully from her seat. I think we could all use something stronger than wine. Shall I? James nodded, watching as she moved to the bar cart. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Detective Morrison. Lisa in custody. No bail this time, perfect timing. The grandfather clock in the dining room struck 9 as Emily finished distributing fresh drinks to the shell-shocked family members. James remained at the head of the table, watching as his relatives struggled to process the magnitude of Daniel and Lisa's betrayal. His cousin Michael broke the heavy silence first. The offshore accounts, the fake medical records, they planned all this for a year? Longer. James took a measured sip of scotch. The embezzlement scheme started before the affair. They needed the money in place before they could run. But why? His Aunt Patricia's voice cracked. They both had good jobs, comfortable lives, because it wasn't enough. Emily's voice cut through the room like a steel blade. Nothing was ever enough for Daniel. He always wanted more. Wanted what James had. Robert Reynolds returned to the room. His face aged a decade in the past hour. Your mother's lying down. This. He gestured at the papers strewn across the table. It's too much for her. Too much. James raised an eyebrow. Was it too much when Daniel stole my baseball cards in 3rd grade? When he crashed my car in high school? When he convinced you and Mom to invest in his failed businesses instead of helping me with my down payment? That's different. No, Dad. It's exactly the same. James stood, commanding the room's attention. Daniel has spent his entire life trying to take what's mine. The only difference is this time he found someone willing to help him do it. But surely you won't press charges, Patricia pleaded. He's your brother, and Lisa's carrying your niece or nephew. They're both going to prison. James's voice brooked no argument. Daniel for embezzlement and fraud. Lisa for medical fraud and conspiracy. The evidence is ironclad. What about the baby? Michael's wife spoke up. What happens to the child? That's not my concern. James's words fell like ice into the room. Daniel and Lisa made their choices. Now their child will live with the consequences. His phone buzzed, another update from Detective Morrison. Daniel requesting a deal. Offering full confession, James allowed himself a small, cold smile. In fact, I just received word that Daniel's ready to confess. To tell the whole story of how he and Lisa plotted to steal my money, frame me for their crimes, and run away together. James, Robert stepped forward, his voice strained. Son, I know they hurt you. God knows they deserve punishment. But this public humiliation, destroying their lives completely, they destroyed their own lives. James met his father's eyes steadily. I'm just making sure everyone knows exactly who they really are. And who are they? A new voice spoke from the doorway. Eleanor Reynolds stood there, pale but composed, steel in her spine. James turned to his mother. They're thieves, liars, traitors. They're people who would destroy my life without a second thought, all for money and lust. They're also family. Eleanor's voice wavered but held firm. No. James's denial cut through the room. Family doesn't do this. Family doesn't betray you, steal from you, try to trap you with another man's child. The baby is innocent. The baby is Daniel's responsibility. James's voice softened slightly. And he'll have plenty of time to think about that responsibility from his prison cell. Emily moved to stand beside James, her presence a silent support. The truth had to come out, Eleanor. Better now from James than tomorrow when it hits the news. The news? Robert's face paled further. What do you mean? Tomorrow morning, James explained. Every major news outlet in the state receives copies of these documents. Daniel and Lisa's crimes will be public knowledge. Their betrayal will be headlines. You can't. Patricia gasped. Think of the family name. I am thinking of it. James's voice hardened again. I'm thinking of how they planned to destroy that name. How they would have left me in prison while they lived on my money, raised their child on my wealth, built their happiness on my destruction. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Outside, snow began to fall, adding to the sense of isolation within the warm dining room. "I have one more announcement," James continued, pulling out his phone. "Lisa was arrested an hour ago for violating her bail conditions. She and Daniel were still plotting to escape, still trying to access the stolen money." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Eleanor swayed, and Robert rushed to steady her. "So you see," James concluded, his voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room, "this isn't about revenge. It's about justice, about consequences, about making sure that everyone, family, friends, the whole world knows exactly what kind of people Daniel and Lisa really are." He stood straightening his tie. "The evidence packets contain everything. The affair, the fraud, the pregnancy, their escape plans. Read them. Share them. Let the truth be known." "And then what?" Robert asked quietly. "After everyone knows, after they're in prison. Then what?" James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then I move on. I rebuild what they tried to destroy. I succeed where they try to make me fail." He turned to the room at large. "But I never forget, and I never forgive." Emily raised her glass in a silent toast. One by one, other family members followed suit, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "You took everything from me, Daniel," James whispered to himself, too low for anyone else to hear. "Now I've taken everything from you." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in clean, cold white. Tomorrow the news would break. Tomorrow, Daniel and Lisa's world would end completely. Tomorrow, justice would be served, but tonight, in this room full of shocked family members, James Reynolds stood victorious. He had won. He had survived. He had conquered, and he would never look back.